I came across one of Luke Ford's old interviews. It was just suggested in a chat. This guy Tanstaafl, or Age of Treason. I thought that was supposed to be like some scary German word, Tanstaafl, but I don't know. Somebody said it was an acronym or something like this. I don't know, whatever. But it's a 2 hour discussion. I like this part about an hour in because he starts challenging him. It gets a little testy, and I find this part to be the most interesting. And obviously, I can't show 2 hours because then it would be like 3 hours with commentary. But there's a lot of kind of crazy, paranoid JQ people. But I thought this, I can't say he's the craziest because like you're always forgetting someone, and there's always someone crazier. But because he's so earnest, that's what sticks out. A lot of the guys kind of make a joke out of it, but just don't aren't as perturbed as this guy and dedicated seemingly as this guy. So that's why it stuck out to me. And this is what 2 years ago, but Lucas had so many interviews. I didn't follow him then, so I was going to play this part and commentate on it.
Down low Jews, the Jews who are in one way or another moving away from the core of the Jewish Jews, the ultra Orthodox Haredim Jews, who are going in the opposite direction, which is, basically insulating themselves from everyone else. But this is the basic mechanics of their form of parasitism. That the Jews that marry out, they don't forget that they're Jews. They don't totally leave behind their Jewishness. It informs their politics and what they do in the world and what they tend to do in the world. And white racialists have recognized this for a long time, is that somebody who's part Jewish tends to take the Jew side in any sort of conflict. They side with the Jews. They argue in favor of the Jews. And they generally tend to undermine whites who are trying to stay white and do things the white way. And that's the effect of this marrying out that, you're deploring from a Jewish point of view, that it means the Jews are going to go extinct in time, when it's not, because there's plenty of Jews who don't marry out. And the second thing is the great harm that it causes. Every Jew that marries out into the non-Jew world becomes an agent for Jewry and then redirects resources from the non-Jew world toward the Jews that are staying Jews.
Well, I mean, this point's interesting. So, white people like this guy are paranoid about white people intermixing because it waters down their blood and, it's genocide and this type of thing. But when Jews do it, it's a part of the conspiracy, or it works in their advantage. I guess he would say the difference is whites form a majority, whereas Jews already are a minority, so they can't really lose that majority. So it's it's apples and oranges, because Jews are different. Used to being a minority. I know he said this before, but well, let's just continue.
So if Jews marry out, it's part of their group evolutionary strategy. And if Jews marry in, it's part of their group evolutionary strategy. So whatever Jews do, it's just part of this group evolutionary strategy.
Yeah, this is the kind, talk about simplistic, childish arguments.
So Luke's trying to challenge him, and, both sides of the coin is Jewish subversion. So he's trying to challenge him and get an answer. And he calls his kind of cross-examination question childish. Well, you're the one saying it, bro. So who has the childish argument?
Jews do it all, yeah, and I'm criticizing both aspects of it and explaining how it works together in favor of the Jews as a group. And you're saying, that somehow I'm being silly because that I'm making a tautology out of it, that no matter what the Jews do, it's wrong. Well, in a sense, that's actually right. Whatever the Jews do, because they're a distinct group of people and they see whites as their enemy, they're a parasitic group, and that they harm my group, yeah, everything that the Jews do is wrong, no matter what they do. A Jew could kill themselves And I'm going to say, yeah, that's the wrong. They were just doing that to get sympathy or something.
Yeah, this part to me was crazy. Like I've heard this argument, but never to this extent. And the fact that he freaks out when you challenge him on it. But then he did specify exactly what he means. I mean, so is everything that a Jew does designed to further their own means and or undermine Whitey? Or could it be that this guy is just super paranoid and has a really paranoid theory about how Jews operate?
I could find some way to figure how it is best for the Jews. Now, I want you to admit something here. And this is one of the key things about the Kaufness thing that was lost in the scuffle between the two of them, is this good for the Jews thing. That underneath, the way I put it is, I take these two Jewish sayings that, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And I say 2 Jews, 3 opinions about what's best for the Jews. That's the key. They are arguing with each other and taking different routes to doing things, but it's always with the underlying idea that it's best for the Jews. They'll have knockdown, drag out fights with each other about this or that aspect of how they should go about their Jewing. But in the end, the premise that both sides or all sides of the Jewish argument have, or all the different facets of their Jewing, is what's best for the Jews. The Zionist Jews are saying this is what's best for the Jews. The anti-Zionist Jews are saying, no, this is what's best for the Jews. The communist Jews are saying this is what's best for the Jews. The anti-communist Jews, the same thing. I mean, that's what's at the root, and that's how you understand what the Jews are doing, what they're doing. And to reduce that down to, well, you're just criticizing the Jews no matter what they do. If they say black or they say white, whatever. Yeah, it is that simple, but it's not.
I mean, he does a good job mocking his own argument. This guy does say whatever the Jews do is acting in their own self-interest. I mean, I could see the point he's trying to make, but this guy says that Gilad Atzmon, who hates Jews or hates Judaism, he's acting in the Jewish interest because he's trying to save face. Same thing with what's his name? The guy that runs, like, self-hating Jew, whatever guy that runs the website. Can't think of his name right now. Uns. That's Jews acting in their own favor. Assuming, like, when I woke up late and went to Starbucks to get a drink, I was acting on behalf of Jews to further Jewish interests. Well, I was furthering my interests because I was slaking my thirst. So, I don't know. This argument is interesting, but also ridiculous because it's Jews can't hurt themselves. It's amazing. Like he said, a Jew could kill themselves, and they would be furthering their own interests. I mean, what an argument. I mean, I guess I could see his point. The criticism that he and others have of white people is they screw themselves over. They're too generous. They're like the giving tree in that story. They're too generous to the point of self-destruction. So, I mean, I don't know. I guess I could see that, but this argument is just totally fucking hilarious and disprovable, right? Because it's like, no matter what a given Jew does, it's always to further their own interests, and it sounds like he's saying, and to undermine Whitey. So let's continue.
Because I'm crazy. It's not because I'm imagining things. I'm explaining.
No, you're not crazy.
To you that that's what's going on. They explain it. They use this phrase. One of the articles about you is Luke Ford good for the Jews? This is not some phrase that Hitler invented. This is not some phrase that anti-Semites invented. This is the question that they ask themselves. This is the way they justify trying to pursue their interests. It's a sort of key phrase that when you see it, it means they're trying to pursue their interests. And that's another key phrase that comes up in this context is monolith. The Jews are not a monolith, is what you constantly hear. And anybody who thinks the Jews are a monolith is crazy, because the Jews,
white people never act in their own interests. Like when they went around conquering and enslaving most of all the world, that was a white man's burden. They were trying to help, do that to better themselves. This is the same point that I hear black nationalists make. Everything Whitey does is to oppress them. So, whatever they blame the white man for bringing in crack. That was a plot to destroy white neighborhoods. Integration, yeah, that was a plot to destroy the black family. The war on crime. After liberating slaves, well, Whitey worked to his advantage because they were able to. They didn't have ownerships of the slaves. They could just anymore. They could just lock them up in prison, pay them shitty wages. They didn't have to care about their well-being as much as say during slavery because they didn't have ownership. They didn't have the investment. So, yeah, not a new argument. I've heard this before in other communities.
Jews are arguing with each other all the time. There's Jews that do complete opposite of what another group of Jews are doing. Yeah, well, but they're still Jews, aren't they? And they still, even the statement, the Jews are not a monolith, is a silly statement because it's basically saying this category, this group, the Jews, which implicitly by calling them...
I can make the same argument. Everything white people does is for their own benefit. Why mass immigration? Because they need to sell their products to new people. They need low-paid slaves. Why did they bring the blacks to America? For cheap labor, for slavery. Why globalism? To enrich white people. It's just a funny, really paranoid, dumb argument, but entertaining. Quite entertaining.
Jews, you're saying they're a monolith, is categorically not a category. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous statement, but people don't generally take things apart. They don't look at it that way. I'm a computer programmer. I work on abstractions and solving problems. So I know how to take things, that logical statements like that, and reduce them down to the essence of what they're saying. And I point those things out. And it always surprises me. I say something like that, like the Jews are not a monolith. Well, yeah, the category is not categorically a category, and that's nonsense. And people go, wow, gee, I never even thought about that. And I sometimes think it's too simple to even write.
Okay.
Well, it's just really simple and so obvious that this guy doesn't even want to bother being cross-examined about it. It's just he's figured it out. It's true, and kind of like any objection to it is ridiculous and actually kind of further proof that his little formula is completely true.
You said a lot there. What was it that you wanted me to admit? I didn't quite follow.
Admit that at the root of the Jewing is it good for the Jews? This question that all the Jews of all the different stripes ask each other, and that's the root of all their debates, is they disagree on what's best for the Jews, which is a fundamental agreement. It appears that they're not monolithic. It appears that they're disagreeing with each other, but it's really just all about what's best for themselves as a group.
No, I think that's ridiculous, and I'll tell you why.
Fuck off, Luke. Stop with your Jewish arguing. Just agree with the fucking man's points. Jesus.
Many people find the most powerful chapter in Kevin MacDonald's Cultural Critique is the chapter on immigration. And Kevin MacDonald has absolutely no doubt that non-white immigration is a very important threat to white sovereignty in their own lands. As Kevin MacDonald writes in his response to Coffness, ethnic displacement is like reducing an extended family or other lineage. It's a drastic loss of fitness, and really no different from displacement on one species or subspecies by another in the natural world. This is natural selection in action as the gene frequencies, genetic combinations, and biocultures characteristics of other peoples increase relative to those of the indigenous peoples of Western European countries, as well as their descendants in North America, Australia, and New Zealand. So in his response to Nathan Coffness, Kevin McDonald is very clear that ethnic displacement is just an absolute disaster for the people being displaced. So when you have Jews who are lobbying for and pushing the displacement of Jews in the Jewish state of Israel, they are doing the very thing that Kevin McDonald says is a disaster. So you have all these Jewish intellectuals who Kevin McDonald cites as evidence of a Judaism's group evolutionary strategy, who are promoting Arab immigration to Israel, who are promoting African immigration to Israel, who are essentially promoting open borders for Israel, who are promoting the end of Israel as a Jewish state. So they are promoting ethnic displacement. And that is a widespread theme in the Jewish left.
Are you saying that they're doing it because they want to destroy the Jews?
I'm saying that your point doesn't make any sense, because these left...
How dare you, Luke? How dare you?
Wing Jews are pushing the very ethnic displacement that Kevin McDonald says is an absolute disaster for the people being displaced. So if Jews are pushing the displacement of their own kind, obviously they're not acting in Jewish interests.
Yeah,
it's Kevin McDonald's own logic.
It's based on the premise that Jews and whites are very similar to each other, which is wrong. The Jews are a people that have lived as a minority amongst other peoples their whole history. And so even if you were to flood Israel, and Jews were to become a minority in Israel, it wouldn't be a real existential threat to the Jews. They've lived that way in diaspora forever. And they live that way in the United States. So let's take the United States, which is what I
mean, I wonder if he's saying if Israel lost their war for independence, it would have been good for the Jews. Because they would have been a minority and they thrive as a minority. I mean, God, it's like... Maybe if the Holocaust had gone on further... and the Germans were unopposed, that would have been good for the Jews. It's just... It's one thing to say Jews are, like, slightly different from white people, so what's bad for white people might not necessarily be bad for the Jews, but... God, Jews are, like, superhuman. Everything that could possibly happen, everything they could possibly do is good for the Jews. And he says this about the self-hating Jews, that... Like, what could a Jew do that would be against their self-interest? I guess agree with Tanstaafl and say that, like, they should leave all white countries and go into exile on an island somewhere. But I doubt even then he would say this guy isn't acting in Jews' best interest. He's acting... or he would say that they still are acting in Jews' best interest, so... But these are the types of crazy theories that these people come up with to make sense of this crazy worldview.
Really care about. I don't give a shit about what happens in Israel. Open borders for Israel is my attitude. But in the United States, what's going to happen is there's going to be...
That would be good for the Jews, right? Because every situation, everything a Jew advocates for would be to their own best interest.
Be different outcomes. I know Stephen Steinlight and his attitude is, oh my God, it's going to be a disaster. We're going to have a whole bunch of people who aren't going to believe in the Holocaust like the current white Americans do. But what's actually going to happen is it's going to lead to the mixing out of the white population of America in much the same way as happened in Brazil or any of the former white countries anywhere, because whites don't have this strong and long history of identifying as a group and fighting consciously against other groups. I mean, there was, when the country was founded, whites had a stronger identity when they were conquering the North American continent. But that's been psychopathologized and demonized in whites, and whites are cowed. Whether it will kick in again when the existential threat becomes clear is... I think it will eventually, but whether it's going to be too late or not, I don't know. Whites will already be reduced to a small minority by then, and they don't do well. We're seeing.
Well, I would say if whites are treated the way Jews have been treated over a period of time, they would start acting like the Jews and form a collective identity and defend themselves. If this anti-white bullshit keeps up, anyway.
What's happening in South Africa with a small white minority. That will not happen to the Jews. The Jews already run the country, and they'll continue to run the country no matter how fractured it becomes ethnically. And in fact, it'll become easier for them to run because they'll have even more players that they can set at each other. The let's you and him fight tactic that they use, the divide and conquer, will become all the easier because the people are already divided. They've imported all sorts of different types of.
I mean, there's a very small percentage of Jews that, quote, run the country or run industry. But yeah, I'm sure you'd agree with that.
The people that they can create strife between. So they're not threatening the United States, and I don't think that they're threatened in Israel for the same reason, that they'll still be able to maintain control. They have colonies all over the world that they can always go to. They're not threatened, and I don't give a shit anyway if they were threatened. But I'm pointing out to you that it's simplistic. At the very least, you're being...
Well, wait a minute. He's saying that in some cases they could be threatened by certain circumstances. Now, what if a Jew was advocating for actions that would bring about those circumstances? Would a Jewish person still be acting in their own best interests? I don't know. That seems like a contradiction, but don't tell this guy that.
Naive to argue as if they are the same as whites, as if the threat from immigration is the same to Jews as it is to whites, because it isn't.
So how did the Jewish tactic of divide and conquer work for them in World War II?
I think it worked very well. Millions and millions of Europeans killed each other.
How many Jews do you think died in World War II?
Not enough, and not many. Certainly not the magical 6 million that they always quote.
How many would you expect?
I don't know. I have no idea.
I have no idea, but I know it's not 6 million because I did some investigation on the internet, so therefore I know. But I know it's not the 6 million. Let's see if he has any basis for that.
But it was
so
not
you think the Jewish strategy really worked really well for them in World War II?
Let me put it in Jewish terms. One Jewish life isn't or one European, one white life is not worth 6 million Jewish lives. So I don't care how many Jews died in World War II. I don't care.
I don't care, but I know it's not 6 million because I'm a Holocaust expert.
Awesome. I appreciate how open and honest you are. And so I think you said earlier, if Jews killed themselves, you see that as...
So this guy got all upset because Luke asked him challenging questions and cross-examined him a little bit, not that hard. And he says, yeah, not enough Jews died in World War II. And Luke is sitting there cool and calm, and this is the guy that's getting upset, and he still whines about this interview and the fact that Luke asked him tough Jewish questions.
Pursuing Jewish interests, was that sarcastic? Was that ironic? Or was that how you really feel?
No, I think I could actually find literally a way to see how... I would find the evidence. You know that I'm evidence-based. If you've ever read my blog, you know I don't just make shit up out of nowhere. I find what people have actually written. I go to pains to quote it. I don't just write about it and misrepresent it. I snip it out with context. I give links to what I write. And then I explain, this is the way I see it. And I think to the extent I appeal to any of my readers, it's because I do that. It's because I lay it out very clearly. I'm not just making stuff up. In that case, I was speculating that if a Jew killed themselves, that I would look for evidences that they were doing it for some advantage to the Jews or some way to harm whites. Yeah, for sure. Because that's what I do in general with anything that happens. An example is school shooting in Florida. You know, how the Jews...
oh, dear, another Jewish conspiracy. The Parkland school shooting.
The first thing I heard about it was that some white supremacist shot up a school in Florida. And that's all I heard. But when you dig into it, you find out the kid is half Jewish, at least. The Jewish media didn't report that, except sort of as a detail buried in some other story that portrayed him as a racist. And the other thing about it is that the school is something like 40% Jewish, which explains why the Jews were so up in arms about it from the get-go. Because they all...
I didn't know that. I didn't know people were so upset about that school shooting because it was so Jewish. Fuck, this guy is so poignant with his analysis. I wonder what the Jewish percentage was at Columbine. Like, was that really Jewish? Was that why people cared? Or was it because it was white kids? Because, that's like what some black person would say. Oh, you care about this school shooting and not another one. What about Virginia Tech? Was there a lot of Jews in that? I didn't. This guy's really good at finding the core reason behind things. Seeing evidence of his theory everywhere.
Knew that it was a heavily Jewish county and a heavily Jewish school. And the funny thing about that is that less than 40% of the victims were Jewish. But they never.
Shit. Like, now this Jewish kid was shooting non-Jews because less of the victims were Jewish than the overall percentage of the school. Well, fuck me. Fuck me. Another Jewish carried out conspiracy.
They never talk about that. They just jump to the conclusion right away. There's a shooting at a school in a Jewish area. It's got to be a white supremacist that did it. They found some.
Well, I'll give this guy that. They're definitely all too quick to say it was a white supremacist. But at the same time, a lot of people will say, "Oh, this is ISIS. This is Islamic terrorism." But like, all right, unless it's the JDL, there's no Jewish supremacist shootings. They don't really exist. Yeah, this kid was Jewish. He shot up the school, but I don't think that's the reason why he did it.
Some idiot gave them a tip that turned out to be false, that it was a white supremacist, and they ran with it. And for a day, that was what the narrative was in the cycle. They never corrected it, never paid any price for it. Yeah, that's so that's the kind of thing I do. I look at what's going on in the world, what are people excited about, and what's the Jewish angle to it. And if I find a Jewish angle, I write about it and I talk about it.
Oh, you definitely have no challenges finding the Jewish angle in any event.
So does the model of Judaism as a group evolutionary strategy have predictive value?
Predictive. In a couple of ways, yeah. First of all, I think when something happens, it's probably involves the Jews. If it's and there's probably some hidden angle.
And there's always a way you can connect the Jews. I mean, absolutely. In any given group of people, somebody had like a Jewish dentist or a Jewish uncle or a Jewish father, or like in a group of 100 people, there's going to be a Jew involved. So like you got to fucking find the Jewish connection to every event. Like it's key. Ignore all the Christians and normal white people. Find that fucking Jew, and that's how you can explain every event that's ever happened ever in history. This guy's right.
To it that involves the Jews. So it's predictive in that way. It's predictive in the way I said about immigration. That
I have a prediction. This guy is. I haven't checked his blog today, but he's whining about the Jews. Tomorrow, guess what he's going to be doing? Whining about the Jews and figuring out how they're behaving badly. And in a year from now, guess what this guy's going to be doing? The exact same thing. I wonder if his predictive power is better than mine.
We kind of know what's going to happen when the country is flooded with non-whites. It's not going to harm the Jews. They're used to living that way.
So I just want to point out a couple of ways.
Yeah, that's right. If people hate white people, these immigrants hate white people or what have you, they're going to make the distinction that, I have some Jew in me and therefore I'm not to be touched. It's exactly what we see with like black Hebrew Israelites. They love Jews.
You significantly differ from Kevin McDonald. Kevin McDonald says explicitly that Judaism as a group evolutionary strategy does not have any predictive value. And he also says that once intermarriage rates start climbing north of 60%, that for those Jews who are out marrying, that's no longer a model of Judaism as a group evolutionary strategy. So
yeah, he's never made the
you
point.
and Kevin differ.
Yeah, about the out marriage thing. No, I don't know of anybody really who's looked at it and talked about it the way I have. That it's actually the other half of the parasitism. That it facilitates. I reduced the parasitism to infiltration, manipulation, and exploitation, and it kind of goes in that sequence. That first the Jews
It's the fucking kosher sandwich, Luke. Like, look, he already explicitly laid out and proved that no matter what the Jews do, it's to help themselves out and undermine the goyim. And you're threatened by this. That's why you're asked. That's why you're challenging him. Like, he already laid it out, and the fact that you're even challenging him is proof that his theory is fucking true. I mean, God, isn't it obvious?
infiltrate your society as Jews, or maybe in secret. But they part of that infiltration is intermarrying with the host population, and they do that. Maybe not.
That's what I'm doing. I'm fucking infiltrating, and undermining that way.
Not consciously, but it ends up working to their. In fact, they go to pains to indoctrinate their children not to marry out. That's the other remarkable thing about the out marriage. The stink that the Jews make about all the out marriage is that it's in spite of the fact that they consciously, explicitly tell their kids that that's not what they want them to do. They want them to find a good Jewish boy or a good Jewish girl to marry. But despite that, some still marry out. But it still ends up working to their advantage for the point that I've made, that it helps them to infiltrate. It helps them then to further manipulate the host population so that they can exploit the resources of the host population for the best.
Yes. When they marry out and when they marry in, it's screwing over Whitey. And that's the goddamn hard truth. Definitely couldn't be that this guy's paranoid and has a ridiculous explanation that no matter what Jews do, it's fucking over Whitey. It's totally not a victim mentality at all.
Benefit of the Jews who remain Jews.
Right. So when Jews marry out, that's part of their group evolutionary strategy. And when they marry in, that's part of their group evolutionary strategy. When they promote immigration restriction, that's part of...
Oh my God, Luke, you're being so ridiculous here. You're calling out his double standards. Like, just accept this fucking theory. The only reason why you're trying to argue against it is because, like, you know you're cornered and he's onto your game. He's on our game. Like, ridiculous fucking cross-examination challenging this guy. What a fucking disgrace.
Group evolutionary strategy. When they promote immigration expansion, that's part of their group evolutionary strategy. When they promote the Republican Party, that's part of their group evolutionary strategy.
Jews, Luke, we already covered this.
We already covered this, Luke. Like, how dare you challenge him? Get with the fucking program. Like, he's figured out the magic key. He's figured out he's a computer programmer. He's figured out the fucking program. Like, the fucking chutzpah of Luke to even challenge this theory.
It's situational, and I think that's the point that McDonald was making. I don't think he said that. I don't remember him saying that it's not predictive. His Judaism as a group evolutionary strategy.
You'll find that on Twitter. He said it doesn't have any predictive value.
What I remember him, the point he emphasized a lot is that the Jews adapt their strategy, that it doesn't stay constant over time, that they adapt to the changing environment around them. And that's a good indication that they are active, conscious, they have agency. And a lot of the arguments that you hear from Jews in defense of their Jewing is this pretense that the Jews don't have agency. And that's another thing. McDonald's never talked about that, I don't think, but that's one of the ways that I analyze what's going on. That this idea of agency, about being in control, being first of all conscious of yourself as a group, and then exerting what power you have over the reality around you to change it. And that the Jews, I agree with McDonald, that the Jews don't just consistently follow one strategy, that they change, they morph,
It's the fucking kosher sandwich. It's so eloquently thought up by Mike Enoch. It's Everything is a fucking conspiracy, Luke. Hello? Jesus. Why is this guy so dense?
Sometimes go back and forth between the outmarriage and the staying insular. It goes back and forth. The genetic evidence, for instance, shows that the Ashkenazi Jews at some point in the past took European wives, but then that stopped, and for many generations.
They didn't talk about Jewish incelism. Like, disappointed in you, Luke. Like, you talked about outmarriage and you talked about in-marriage. But what about when Jews just stay at home and look at porn? Like, that's benefiting Jews too, because they're being selfish. They're not going to, sacrifice for others, for a wife or for kids. They just want to stay at home, be degenerate, and have fun. Like, that's also a Jewish conspiracy that benefits the Jews. Pretty disappointed that you didn't bring up Jewish incels. I mean, they're people too.
Then they just were endogamous. They married within them their own population, and that's what's remarkable about Ashkenazi Jews is not the fact that they lived in Europe, but the fact that they've stayed Jews, that they've stayed an insular, identifiably different, distinct population, and they've resisted mixing with Europeans. They've mixed a little bit, but not as much as other groups of Europeans have mixed together and blended.
But now that they are mixing, that's to fuck over the Goyim and still a part of the conspiracy. So, I'm not sure he's being 100% consistent there, but he's being consistently ridiculous at least. So that part's good.
Okay, so I want to respond to something you said. You said Jewish strategy is situational.
Oh, fuck, I hope you're not challenging him, Luke. Like, this is just disrespectful.
No, but the essence of the Kaufmanist critique, and what I'm saying is that the examples of Jewish disagreement that are given in the Kaufmanist critique and what I gave are not comparing Jews at different historical periods. They're comparing Jews in the very same period in the very same place. So I'm talking about in the United States of America, you're saying when Jews marry out, it's group evolutionary strategy. When they marry in, it's group evolutionary strategy. The United States of America, when they promote immigration restriction, that's part of the Jewish group evolutionary strategy. When they promote immigration expansion as part of the group evolutionary strategy. If Jews kill themselves as part of the Jewish strategy, like whatever Jews do. So your theory
look, I already copped to that. I told you, whatever Jews do is bad.
Look, why are you questioning this so much, Luke? He said it, and now you're trying to make him prove it. Like, your question proves that he's right, because the fact that you're challenging him is proof that you're threatened by this guy's cracked the code, okay? So just fucking get with the program and stop being so full of shit. This is 2 years ago. I hope you learn that this guy's on point by now. Look, you can't disprove the fact that in this guy's head, everything the Jews do is bad and to the detriment of Goyim. Luke, you can't disprove that. You didn't disprove this man. In his head, that's the truth. It's his truth, okay?
Yeah, that's because they're the enemy. So from my point of view, I didn't start out with that point of view, but over time...
They're the enemy, and he's married to one, and his kids are Jewish. Yeah, they're the enemy.
I've realized it's pretty fruitless to argue with a Jew about what...
It's fruitless. Like, look, they won't take the truth. They won't just agree with the ideas. It's fruitless. They ask questions. They disagree. They cross-examine you. It's fruitless. Like, I agree with this guy. Why would you have a theory and other people are asking mean questions, trying to bring it down? There's no point in even doing it.
They're doing wrong because they're not going to stop it. They're going to come up with arguments like what you're coming up with.
Yeah, Luke, asking him for proof and evidence and challenging him and pointing out his inconsistencies. Yeah, it's on you. Yeah. Don't clarify this guy's right. He shouldn't have to clarify his theory. Like, it's just... God, Luke, you're so dense.
Which is that I'm the problem. That I'm imagining that no matter what Jews do, it's a problem. And yes, it is. And I think I've been reasonable. I've explained how it's different.
It's been totally reasonable, okay? No matter what Jews do, it's a conspiracy against Whitey and for the benefit of the Jews. And like, how dare you ask clarifying questions or challenge it?
Different. And you know, this thing now that different Jews at the same time are doing different things. Yeah, well, did it occur to you that maybe those two different Jews disagree about what they think is best for the Jews? But the point is that they're both trying to pursue what they think is best for the Jews, or at least they say that. At least that's their act. I'll grant that some of them may do what they want to do, and that their excuse is, well, it's best for the Jews. But I think whites aren't even doing that. So we'd be a lot better off if we were pursuing a strategy like that. What's best for the whites? And even if some of them were not sincere, if at least some of them were, we'd have a better chance of thriving than we are now, where basically whites are demoralized and disorganized and dying.
Do white people have agency?
Yes, they do.
So are they responsible for the societies they create?
Yes.
So then the Jewish question isn't really that big.
Yeah, it is actually, because it has to do with control. Who actually has control at this moment? And it's pretty obvious to me that the Jews have control, maybe not absolute control. There are things that they can't control. The internet is one, for instance, the fact that I can publish my thoughts on the internet. But they're working to change that, and they will eventually succeed. We know from history in the Soviet Union, they made anti-Semitism, air quotes, a crime. They made it a capital crime. You paid with your life.
How do you think someone who doesn't know either of us and doesn't have a strong opinion either way on the JQ, when they hear you say anything Jews do is for
Luke, this is just more of your Jew paranoia. Like, he has a theory, and theories, you just have to accept them. You can't cross-examine them. Don't you know the rule?
Jewish interests? How do you think they hear that?
I think that they'll hear that you're playing games, that you're smart enough to realize.
Normal people are going to watch this, and even though you seemingly blew big holes through his little theory, they're going to think you're the one out of line, not acting legitimately.
Realize that the arguments you're making are not honest arguments. They're not valid arguments.
Yeah, disvalid arguments, as opposed to his theories where no matter what happens, it's this group behaving badly, no matter what. Behaving badly, behaving selfishly, trying to undermine Whitey.
I'm pretty upfront about my bias. I'm biased in favor of whites. I see Jews as the enemy and of whites, and that's where everything that I'm saying springs from. But that doesn't mean that I'm making stuff up out of nowhere. It doesn't mean that I'm being irrational. So I trust that will come through.
It's totally rational and solid. That's why he freaks out when you point out the inconsistencies and accuses you of playing Jew games. That's on you, Luke.
Through to any white person who listens to this. And I wouldn't be talking to a Jew.
I'm going to play this to my white friends, and they're definitely going to become like this guy and become Jew-hating Nazis because his argumentation is so valid.
Jew to begin with. I'm not interested at all in saying anything that appeals to them.
So you said the arguments I'm making are dishonest. So could you restate in your own words what are my arguments and why are they dishonest? Or just pick one.
No, I don't have a photographic memory. And
nope, you're challenging me, so I refuse to answer that question. I don't have a photographic memory, so I can't remember 5 minutes ago. So I'm just going to deflect any and all criticism of my little theory.
And you would then pick nits with, I got some.
Yep, you would pick nits. You would try to point out inconsistencies. This is why in our legal system, we just have the prosecutor state something and it's accepted at face value. You don't ask questions because, a prosecutor could deliver a case and then, the defense attorney might be mean and pick nits and point out inconsistencies. It's just totally illegitimate, Luke. Disappointed in you.
Word wrong about what you said. I'm confident that if somebody listens to this, if I listen to this afterward, I'll be happy with the arguments that I made, and I'll be happy. I think that people whose opinions I care about will hear the way that you're.
Other Nazis that his opinions he cares about, yes, they'll totally agree, and I agree with that. That's why you have these little subcultures, because a guy like this comes on a show, gets challenged, gets cross-examined, not even that meanly, like pretty moderately, can't handle it, calls the other party illegitimate. But don't worry, me and my other David Irving World War II revisionist fans, we all agree with each other, and we have our own evidence. We bounce off each other, so fuck you, Luke.
Arguing. It's not like the first time I've heard these kinds of arguments made. The intermarriage argument, or the immigration is also bad for the Jews. These are not important to me. I don't care.
Not answering the critics is not important. He has his little theory. He's dismissing your bullshit cross-examination. That's it.
So, would you describe Jews as ethnocentric?
Absolutely. The most ethnocentric people that there are. The most.
I was just trying to cover the contentious part, like where the guy blows off the cross-examination as completely illegitimate and has no answers. So I don't know if it's over now, but I'm just going to keep playing because I'm not going to do this whole interview.
Centric group, the most powerful group. They are the most hyper-conscious of themselves as a group.
So Jews, the most ethnocentric people there are, yet they marry out over 60%, while there are plenty of other groups that rarely marry out. But somehow Jews who are marrying out in the majority are more ethnocentric than groups that don't marry out.
I've already explained how the marrying out actually ends up helping them as a...
Yes, it's a double standard, Luke. You know, what hurts other groups helps Jews. That's just the way it is.
As a group, and that the ones that don't marry out reproduce at very high rates, and so there's no threat to their survival. And that, I think I've made that case repeatedly. So for you to continue to characterize it as somehow wrong, I'm not going to repeat myself on that point.
I didn't care.
Yep, I'm not gonna respond to your challenges. You just accept my theories.
Characterize it anyway. I just asked you a question.
Okay. Next question.
Okay. So when we have Jews who are overrepresented among the leadership of violently opposing movements, this does not seem to fit in any obvious way with MacDonald's theory, which is the essence of at least one of MacDonald's theories in cultural critique, is that Jews push the opposite on non-Jews that they seek for themselves. So on non-Jews, they push multiculturalism, multiracialism, while they seek to conserve the benefits of cohesion and exclusion for their own group.
Yeah, I think that's just normal behavior. I would term it and explain it in a different way, or describe it in a different way. It's just what you do to your enemy. If you have a rifle and your enemy has a rifle, you try to take your enemy's rifle away. If you can do it by talking nonsense to him and getting him to think that holding a rifle is wrong morally, well, that's great. That's what the Jews do. In fact, a lot of what they do is just moralizing. That's what they've been doing the longest. They convince people that doing what's good for the Jews is good, and doing what's good for themselves is bad. It's really that basic, and they've been doing that since Christ, and probably before, into the dim traces of history we don't even have. We have a less complete understanding of.
So the examples that Kevin MacDonald uses to back up their assertion actually turn out to be counterexamples. So
I don't agree with that. That's Kaufness's characterization of it, and I don't agree with that.
Okay, so I'll just give one of his arguments, and you can point out where it's factually or logically incorrect.
Sure.
So Kevin MacDonald notes that in a 1974 article of the top 21 intellectuals in the United States, the 15 were Jews, and MacDonald notes that 11 of them were New York Jews, all who were at one point or another, this is MacDonald's exact phrasing, significantly influenced by Freudian theory.
Yeah.
So when you examine these 15 Jews, they are Daniel Bell, Noam Chomsky, Irving Howe, Norman Mailer, Robert Silvers, Susan Sontag, Lionel Trilling, Hannah Arendt, Saul Bellow, Paul Goodman, Richard Hofstadter, Irving Kristol, Herbert Marcuse, Norman Podhoretz, and David Reisman. Only
Jesus,
one
did you do that off
of these
top of your head, or did you read that? I hope you read it, because that's scary.
Intellectuals actually exemplifies his theory. That's Norman Podhoretz, who pushed immigration restriction for Israel and, immigration expansion for the United States. So the very example that MacDonald uses to try to make his case for Judaism as a group evolutionary strategy actually turns out to be a counterexample, because so many of these names were pushing the very same thing for Israel as they were pushing for the United States. So that seems to me a substantial challenge to MacDonald's scholarship. What do you think?
I think MacDonald has to defend himself on that point. If that's the way he chooses to argue it, then he's got to defend his approach to arguing it. I would argue it as it's not. I would simply say the Jews are the enemy, and so that's Jews Jewing freely like they were.
Jews are the enemy. He doesn't need to analyze these examples and prove one way or the other. They're just the enemy. He's made that determination.
Some of those names, Marcuse and Sontag, I mean, these were virulently, in the true sense of the word virulent anti-white Jews. They were enemies of white people. They were explicit about it. And that's what's important about those Jews from my point of view. Not that they were Jewish, part of a Jewish intellectual movement that was intellectually consistent or not. In the case of the Freudians, they were just fraudulent. So, the fact that some of them were this list of Jews was supposedly Freudians, and that was supposed to prove something. The fact that they're Jews, and the fact that some of them, two of them at least, off the top of my head, if you read that list again, I could probably name another one or two that I know for sure have been anti-white. Hofstadter is the other one I can remember. That he was the one who wrote about the conspiratorial mind of the right winger or something stupid like that. He was a half Jew too. Richard Hofstadter, if I'm correct. They were basically at war with the whites in America. And the whites in America didn't recognize it as warfare. The Jews understood it as warfare. They saw themselves as a group, as opposed to the whites who still had control over some parts of the levers of power and using the same tactics. So it's not a surprise that it would be bad for the Jews if people find themselves as a Jew, writing an op-ed about how bad tribalism is for democracy. Opinion about race is that it's just a social. They're stealing the air from anyone else. The racists. I mean, this is like just science, but otherwise, just do squeeze.
Why are whites unable to overcome that?
Bad, encouraged it sort of from all, or that seems to always like this awareness, and ideas, and white people.
Let me read some super chats, and I'll pause after each one. If you want to comment, just jump in and comment, or just say pass. Frank writes, Luke, thanks for having Tan on the show. Could you ask him what he thinks young white guys should do to spread awareness of the Jewish problem?
Start a blog.
Talk about it. Don't let it slide. And talk about it seriously. I mean, there's a value to the memes. I understand the whole, let's joke about it, let's make it ironic and all that, and we can slide in under the radar that way. But talk seriously about it too, and think seriously about it. One of the things that I'd like people to do is to not take away from the example I set is don't think that anything that I'm doing says or implies that I think it's okay to get married to somebody who's Jewish or somebody who's half Jewish. I don't. I part of why I do what I do as unapologetically and as unrelenting as I do is I don't want other white kids, white boys to make the same mistake, or white girls for that matter. I don't, I chalk it up partly to my own bad instincts that it happened to me, but it also I was in a society that didn't teach about the Jews. There was nothing bad could be said about the Jews. It's still true to a certain extent today, although we have on the internet the freedom to start talking to each other, and that's why there is hope now, and it's better. But keep your head low too. Don't do anything stupid. I would advise young white guys. Keep your powder dry. But it's the kind of silly way of put. It'll be a time to act, and not everybody needs.
Come on.
Are you a leader?
No, I wanted to be a leader. I wouldn't be a good. I don't know how to describe it. But for it, I'm be one.
And you're welcome to comment or comments by the same Jew. And you're welcome, sir, and an NRA member. Strategy.
I don't know what that means.
Okay. Comment. Ask this guy if all Jews are in on it.
No, I don't think all Jews understand things the way I understand it, but they certainly, and this goes along with the most ethnocentric group, they are the most aware, pursues the interests of the Jews, what's best for the Jews. Ask him back, does he know the statement, what's good for the Jews? Can he acknowledge
I'm sure he does.
that's coming?
Yeah.
Okay,
He
so he's in on it, yes.
Okay.
That means he's in on it.
Okay. And then he also writes, tell Tan that many Jews are screwed over by Jewish power. I am one of them.
Take it up with the Jews.
They ruin society in general. I'm not elite. I am just as screwed.
I don't care. He should take it up with the Jews then, just like I am. Well, that's his business. It's between him and his own people.
Well, at least this guy's taking responsibility. He's saying, my people. Well, he's not taking individual responsibility, but he's saying my people have screwed shit up. But this Tan guy is not saying, Whitey has fucked all this shit up, it's all on the Jews, whatever. I'm just going to do my final commentary here because I don't know if I'm going to find anything as good as that part, but it was just really interesting. He has this thesis, which any good thesis can be cross-examined, and he just totally refuses to answer all the inconsistencies of this theory. And just gets pissed off and considers it completely illegitimate to even ask. And I just find his explanation, this is common against these JQ tards. Everything is a conspiracy. Everything is to better the Jews, to undermine Whitey. Everything bad has a Jewish component. Everything good Jews have done is minimized, at least, if not completely dismissed. So it's just kind of unique to any phenomenon that involves Jewish perfidy. Evidence not needed, like 9/11 attacks, USS Liberty. The most bullshit explanations taken at face value. And then things that are considered settled science by historians, like the Holocaust. Every piece of evidence you could possibly deliver. Nope, this is a fraud. Nope, that confession was acquired by torture. Can never be proven. So it's basically just a self-perpetuating alternate reality of individuals with their own history, their own theories. Their proof is just the same bullshit that they use another person's bullshit. They have their own historians. They just use that. That's their proof, in quotation marks. So this guy just illustrates that ridiculousness pretty well. What else? Yeah, I think I put it as good as I can put it. I'm just gonna see if there's anything else worth commentating on, but that's pretty much my commentary.
Go move to Israel and vote for open borders.
Okay, Rondolph writes, is monomania on JQ better than white improvement?
Yeah, well, I've already addressed that, but monomania is one of those things. That's one of those psychopathologizing words that if you talk too much about the Jews, and which is easy to do because not many people talk about the Jews, that it can be characterized then as monomania. I've been accused of monomania by other people who supposedly are not just white racialists, but are critical of Jews themselves. They think I go too far, that I talk only about the Jews. And they call it monomania, which is basically just following the Jewish pattern of criticizing people who are critical of Jews. I dismiss it. It's, if anything, whites are not critical enough of Jews. Why, imagine Jews criticizing other Jews for being too monomaniacal about anti-Semitism. I'm sure that there are some that do. I don't really care that they do, but it's not a problem that Jews have. Jews complain plenty about anti-Semitism. That's their number one concern. They're obsessed with it. They're obsessed with their own interests. And so I would say that my concern about the Jews, which is being characterized as monomania, is nothing but concern for my own no impact. You know what was interesting about that? The black guy who said that interpreted the thing about that I says, because explain that groveling or grovel.
Nathan Coffness wrote that there are outliers, therefore Kevin McDonald is now disproven. Kevin responds, I never said that at all. So, how are whites to speak on Jewish influence without anti-Semite being shrieked?
It won't. That we don't believe other white people have, and the child molestation with that it's something like this. Now, will enjoy hearing what I have to say, and I think I've said some new things that
I find when I talk to someone, it always helps me get clarity, or it always helps me come out with
Yeah, that's what I think about that. I think part of it, but
he says, I grew up Orthodox. Jews who convert according to Jewish law are absolutely Jews. Luke's issues are issues with himself. He is accepted. And Jake says, presumably to me, this guy's trying to get into your head. So those are all the super chats. Any final words, sir?
Yeah, I am trying to get into your head. It's got a long history amongst the Jews. I remember when I first it was either the Assyrians or the Babylonians. I'm probably misremembering here, but in the borders and flooded them with non-Jews and basically killed the other half. That a lot of the example, they escaped doing actions and left because they're welcome.
2 hour mark. I just wanted to throw it open to you if there's, I'm sure anything that the Gentile to the thing.
I mean,
okay, excellent.
I've said it all. Yeah, I'm talked out.
Great. So I just want to read the chats rather than have you leave and then read them because they're critical. And so you can, feel free to ignore them, but I'd rather do it while you're here. They're all from Jake the Jew. He says the WASPs invented universalism, not Jews. He says, I grew up Orthodox. Jews who convert according to Jewish law are absolutely Jews. Luke's issues are issues with himself. He is accepted. And Jake says, presumably to me, this guy's trying to get into your head. So those are all the...
Your head invited me to come talk to you, so I'm talking. Jake the Jew has to say about anything.
So I'm just curious. I'm lying because now I got one more question. When I try to describe the world as I see it and as I experience it, do you think I'm 10% delusional, or do you think I'm the truth as I...
You that you're a white guy, that's pretty...
All right, that's
you don't have the same reaction.
Hope you enjoyed. I did. Ciao.